Do violent movies and video games push teenagers into acts of violence?
Violent video games.
Violent video games.
Seems like we have been hearing about this information for years.
What we're showing in this experiment is that playing a violent video game, even for 25 minutes, has a significant effect on the brain's response to violence.
I know that one place parents want us to draw the line is with violence in video games.
I grew up in an era where video games were demonized as being dangerous. From the late 80s through the 2000s, mainstream media led the smear campaign against my favorite hobby.
And one of the kids said, we played the game by day and we lived the game by night. It's a murder simulator.
But I never understood this mainstream narrative. I mean, I grew up playing games like Doom, Quake, Resident Evil, but I wasn't out there hurting anyone. In fact, my experience with gaming has largely been positive. They helped me develop my problem-solving skills and fostered my creativity. Over the last few months, I've discovered an unlikely hero that flies in the face of the moral panic surrounding gaming, despite the fact that it's basically nightmare fuel. I'm talking about Bloodborne, a game notorious for its dark themes, aggressive combat, and high difficulty. I've played a lot of games, and I've always fallen prey to panic button mashing and stonewalling my way through challenges. But that wasn't going to work with Bloodborne. My experiences, particularly with past horror games, didn't prepare me for the skill-based mechanics I would need to master in order to beat it. No other game had asked me to get up close and personal with the actual horror. No other game forced me to learn the nuances of enemies in combat in order to make progress. Parry, dodge, serrated weapons for these enemies, bolt paper for that boss. In Bloodborne, we enter the world uninformed and unarmed before encountering a werewolf in the very first room. We are entirely unequipped to handle such a situation, but the game, like life, doesn't care. And so I failed, and so I died, and so I tried again. And as challenging or unfair as the game seemed, I tried again and again until somewhere along the line, something magical happened. I began to make progress. Going into Bloodborne, I noticed I had picked up some bad habits and distorted ways of thinking when it came to horror games. In other games, I was thrown items like candy at a parade. I could get through just about any enemy encounter so long as I had the bullets and resources to do so. I quickly realized that this game is not a power fantasy. Hacking and slashing my way through enemies without a plan was only going to get me dead when what I needed was to get good. I was woefully unprepared to deal with the variety of enemies and having to learn their particular quirks. Most horror games have relatively low enemy variety. This is especially true of boss fights, where the default strategy is hit them a lot. But Bloodborne was forcing me to change. I had dreams about how I was going to approach and take down certain bosses. I was role-playing my actions hours in advance of actually playing. This served me particularly well with the Vicar Amelia fight. I had failed several times the night before, but when I came back the next morning, I defeated her on the first try. With every step I took into the nightmare landscape that is Yharnam, I began to better understand mobs and how they would react in certain situations. I had gained the skills and knowledge necessary to survive, to the point where I'm fairly confident in most areas. I consciously trained myself to remain calm during intense moments and difficult fights, almost to the point of meditation. I had to remain hyper-focused because when I wasn't calm, I failed. Bloodborne is true cosmic horror, from eldritch abominations and brotherhoods of secret knowledge to hunters who have lost their sanity. So you might be surprised to learn that playing this game became relaxing, calming, and even zen, at least for me. But apparently, I'm not the only one who feels this way. You don't have to look far to find videos dedicated to Bloodborne lore to fall asleep to, or Reddit posts sharing how this game got the player through a difficult time in their life, or testimonies like this. This game, with its beautiful, horrifying world, the game you would least expect to help with anxiety and depression. I love it, I adore it, it keeps me together. We live in a world where this seems like a total mismatch. I mean, using such an obviously stressful game to manage a stressful mental state like anxiety or depression, no way, this must be a fluke. Luckily, as I was thinking about this phenomenon, I saw that a group of game psychologists would be presenting a panel at PAX West 2021 called The Psychology of Soulsborne Games, Analyzing Depression and Grit. So of course, I went to Seattle. While there, I had the chance to pick their brains about some of the behaviors that I'd been observing.
I think what games help us do is they frame sort of our interpretation of what's happening in the world, and games give us a mechanism to actually act. So we often talk in social psychology the idea of agency. So agency is people's ability to feel like they're acting in the real world. And games give us sort of the models to sort of apply it. And essentially there's not a real world map that tells you these are things that are going to hurt me, these things are help me. You build these mental models that will help you make sense of the world. And games train you how to use those.
This very thing that might just seem like a hobby to people can very much turn into a tool that can positively impact anyone.
Anyone, not just gamers.
Not just gamers.
Absolutely. Yes.
I learned a lot about the various aspects of gamer behavior and the research being done in the field of game psychology, from why we like hard games to the importance of achievement. But by far the most interesting thing I learned about was the use of gaming in therapy.
Why would a cosmic horror game induce calm in certain people?
So if we look at anxiety as a whole, for some folks that have anxiety and they seek out horror movies, they seek out horror experiences, they play cosmic horror games, for them to seek out something that they know is going to purposefully trigger their anxiety, almost in an odd way, has a calming effect. You're putting yourself in this situation, but you have the control over it. We started having this idea that what if we started using gaming, what if we started using pop culture like superheroes and kind of incorporate them into the groups that they have to sit through anyway.
Now, that's not to say that you are basically transported into a game, but at least you start to feel, what are some techniques that I can use that will help me be better equipped?
There's still a lot of work to be done when it comes to understanding the relationship between gamers and their games, let alone looking at Bloodborne specifically. But I believe Bloodborne teaches us something fundamentally true about how to approach life. It trains us to confront fear and failure with a certain state of mind. At first, it's very counterintuitive. After all, anyone who's spent any amount of time on Twitter knows that the only socially acceptable thing to do for someone struggling with anxiety or depression is to shield them from stress and offer unconditional support. And while I'm not suggesting that you go on Twitter and start showing depressed people some tough love, it's unlikely that any amount of dopamine hits received on social media will have a long-lasting positive impact on someone's journey to recovery. Tackling our issues is almost always uncomfortable, and Bloodborne, as uncomfortable as it might be, starts to blur the line between gaming and actual therapy. You see, there's a type of therapy known as cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT. In it, therapists help to equip their clients with the tools necessary to recognize and do some key things, such as learning to detect one's distortions in thinking that are creating problems, then reevaluating them in the light of reality, gaining a better understanding of others' behaviors and motivations, and then using role-playing to prepare for potentially problematic interactions, using problem-solving skills to cope with difficult situations, and learning to calm one's mind and body, and learning to develop a greater sense of confidence in one's own abilities and facing fears as opposed to avoiding them. This kind of therapy has been proven super effective in treating a variety of illnesses and disorders, including anxiety. Bloodborne's horrifying veneer prompts us to viscerally react with panic and button mashing. But gradually, we allow the game to ease us out of these unproductive stress responses into the calm and methodical mindset required to win. This mental shift from unproductive thoughts to productive ones is something that we usually learn from our own experiences if everything goes well. But perhaps due to circumstance, personality, upbringing, or plain old bad luck, some of us get stuck before we find the light. And that's where gaming may be a uniquely useful therapeutic tool. It's a sort of simulation that we can opt into and out of, a place where it's okay to fail, a world with rules and challenges that build our perseverance and grit. And the more I learned about how other players were interacting with this game, the more it seemed to me that they were doing so in a pseudo-therapeutic way. And research shows that the benefits of engaging in cognitive behavioral therapy can last for weeks and even months after its initiation. This mental toughness that the game has been teaching us over the course of dozens and dozens of hours doesn't just exist within the game. It exists within our own minds. Good news doesn't sell, so it's no wonder that we haven't heard more stories from mainstream media about the positive impact that gaming can have on mental health. But I firmly believe that games can be good for us, even the dark and scary ones. Bloodborne teaches us that with enough calm, we can face any horror. With enough grit, we can move past any failure. And with enough perseverance, we can win. And this, I believe, is why Bloodborne has earned a special place in the hearts and minds of its players.